Hi, my name is Samantha Alholm and it's December 8th. So I'm going to be talking about how the endocrine control, such as like the organs, have control over the digestive system and help with regulation. So we'll talk about the digestive system generally. And so it's also that system is also known as the gastrointestinal system because it includes the stomach and the intestines. Um, one and so the pathway goes from the mouth, the oral cavity, and that food travels down from there to the esophagus, to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, to the colon, rectum, and to the anus. And so the small intestine is kind of where all the nutrient absorption happens, and it takes out all the nutrients and absorbs it into the body so that we can use it for our homeostasis. Um, and so then that chime is what it's called when all the nutrients are taken out of it. Goes into the large intestine. That's where most of the water absorption kind of occurs. And so then it travels into the colon, and then it further takes out more electrolytes from that food, and it is excreted through the anus. So the digestive system has four functions: secretion, digestion, absorption, and motility. Its primary function is of digestion, which is the chemical and mechanical breakdown of all the food and nutrients in our body so we can use them. So secretion is basically all these nutrients moving. Secretion is the movement of like enzymes and electrolytes into the intestine so that we can absorb certain nutrients appropriately and effectively. Digestion is moving those absorbed nutrients into the body and the tissues. Absorption is kind of those nutrients such as like glucose and proteins and carbs into the extracellular fluid. And then that moves into the body, which would be digestion. And the motility is the food moving through like the intestines, and that is kind of regulated through the enteric nervous system, but we'll go into that later. And they do that through a series of contractions. Some other components that are used during the digestive tract are enzymes, exocrine glands, endocrine organs, and epithelial cells. And epithelial cells kind of just they secrete saliva, or goblet cells secrete mucus, and so that helps in breaking down food chemically. And so we'll talk about exocrine and endocrine organs. Regulation of the digestive system is really important because you want to make sure that the food isn't going so fast throughout our body that we can't have appropriate time to absorb and digest those materials and nutrients that we need in our body. So some ways that we can do that is through the parasympathetic nervous system, and that uses the vagus nerve, and paracrine signals, as we talked about, are local signals that help regulate digestion of certain molecules. And then we also use the enteric nervous system, which we haven't really talked about in class much, but it's separate from the central nervous system. It's not innervated by the spinal cord or the brain. It kind of acts as has its own integrating control center, and so that's like it's called little brain. And so this enteric nervous system mostly controls like gastric motility, which basically the flow and rate of how fast it moves throughout the digestive system, and it controls those contractions of like the stomach and the small intestine and the gallbladder, and we'll go over into that. So basically, we absorb the nutrients of water, electrolytes such as like sodium, potassium, chloride. We also absorb iron and calcium. Calcium is very important for neurostimulation that we've seen before. Carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, all the macromolecules, and vitamins are very important for transport, and like proteins that use those minerals. So digestion is also regulated by exocrine glands and endocrine glands, and we'll talk about that. So those are the pancreatic and liver organs that we'll talk about in the next few slides. So the pancreas is both an endocrine and exocrine organ. There are different portions. It's located between the small intestine and the stomach, as we've seen on this picture on the right. The exocrine portion have acinar cells that secrete digestive enzymes. And so the parasympathetic nervous system can enhance that secretion of those enzymes, and we'll see that in the next slide. Those enzymes are emptied into the duodenum, which is the first portion of the small intestine, as you can see the little duct in the pancreas that enters into the small intestine. They also have, the exocrine portion also have duct cells that secrete sodium bicarbonate, and so those pancreatic enzymes that move to the small intestine, they are moved through with sodium bicarbonate, which is like a watery fluid, and that neutralizes the acidic chyme in the small intestine. The endocrine portion of the pancreas kind of deals with hormonal regulation. And so one example of that is the blood sugar control. So islet cells in the endocrine portion secrete insulin or glucagon. Insulin is secreted when there's high blood sugar, and then glucagon is secreted when there's low blood sugar, so we can maintain those levels of homeostasis. We've learned before that there are problems with that, such as like diabetes type 1 and type 2. Yeah. That's kind of the process that's affected there. And then these pancreatic enzymes that move into the small intestine, those are called zymogens, and those are the inactive forms. And then we're going to talk about how those become activated in the next slide. So, the process of food and enzyme use is kind of explained here. So food is traveled through the esophagus, and it comes through the stomach, and it goes into the small intestine. And so when this food goes into the small intestine, it initiates the enteric nervous system to start regulating. It's already regulating in the stomach and all, and so it continues those contractions of the small intestine to control food going through. And it also causes hormones called secretin, cholecystokinin, or CCK, and GIP to release into the intestine. And then this hormone release causes the pancreatic enzymes that control different digestions of fat or protein to get excreted into the small intestine within the fluid of sodium bicarbonate. And so as these enzymes are in the small intestine, there's zymogens, and they become activated through this process. So as zymogens are released, enteropeptidase is converting trypsinogen, which is an active form of trypsin, gets converted to the active form of trypsin, the enzyme. And so this trypsin then converts these zymogens into an active form of enzyme. So these lipases and colipases, or peptides, become activated, so they can help in that digestion of the different macromolecules that are in the food. So lipases and colipases deal with fat digestion, and then peptidases, endopeptidases, proteases are dealing with protein digestion. So then we'll go to the next slide. The liver. The liver is basically a biological filter. Capillaries from the small intestine that have absorbed stuff from the intestine, they move into the liver first. And so that's filtering out all the blood that we have from materials that we've ingested. So if there were drugs or anything like that, it would be processed in the liver first. So that happens through cytochrome P450 isozymes, and then so it travels from the capillaries of the intestines to the hepatic portal vein to the liver, and then as it gets filtered, that blood moves to the right atrium so that those drugs don't become toxic to us and doesn't reach circulation and cause other problems in our body. And so the liver also deals with fat digestion by secreting bile and bile salts. So the way it does that, it travels to the gallbladder, which gallbladder can store bile, and then that gets sent to the duodenum through the common bile duct, and so that helps with digestion of fat. So we'll talk about it in the next slide. So, if a meal is consisting of fat, this will be noticed by the enteric nervous system, And so this causes contractions of the gallbladder. This contraction of the gallbladder will then send bile to the duodenum, into the ileum, to help with digestion of fats. The way it does that is it increases surface area on the lipid soluble components of the food. And then this will make it easier for like lipases or colipases to digest that lipid and fat, and we can use it into the body to get into the blood. And so there are a limited amount of those bile salts. It's called the essential bodies pool. And so it recycles back to the liver, and so it can get stored again for use when we ingest fat. And so it's kind of the same process. We have a limited amount of glucose transporters in the kidney, so there are a limited amount of bile salts that we can use. And so that's kind of the exocrine portion of the liver. The endocrine portion of the liver deals with hormonal control, we said before, in the pancreas. It deals with hormone control of iron. So when there is high iron in the blood, it's detected by the liver, and so the hormone hepcidin gets secreted, and it binds to the ferroportin, which is a transporter for hepcidin. I should say it is involved with iron regulation. And so when hepcidin binds to ferroportin, it causes enterocytes to destroy that ferroportin transporter, and this will cause lower iron levels in the intestines. So that's the last kind of slide on like the liver. And so as we've seen, there are endocrine and exocrine functions for both of these organs, and those are just two different ways that digestion of food can be regulated by these two organs. And so this last slide is a concept map, a study aid for all the information we kind of just went over. And you can use this to help study for a test. You can kind of put like a paper over parts of it and like slide it and just like teach yourself, and just like kind of guess the answers, and you'll help you learn the material. But thank you.